I believe that God enjoys creating different planets, plants and animals everywhere for the same reason that we participate in creation as well, because he gave us the power to be able to create families. And it gives us pleasure. We really enjoy that. And I'm a biology professor at PUC. I love animals and studying them. And I had a little accident on the first day of the year. I was tide pooling. And if you know, that's when you're looking for little marine animals along the shore of the ocean in Southern California. And I slipped and fell on a rock, and I got a little tiny fracture. They tell me it's going to heal fine, and hopefully you're going to get some images coming up soon. So God created birds and animals that we could study and enjoy, and hopefully we could learn some lessons from as well. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals, but for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So I'd like to think that God intentionally wanted Adam to experience loneliness, which we all feel at some point in our lives, and we kind of have this yearning to unite and find a companion that we could spend the rest of our lives with. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. And this was God's original plan, that we would stay that way as one flesh as long as we live, until death do we part. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Unfortunately, we have an adversary there that likes to cause all kinds of problems, and a lot of us yield to temptations. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence, even brothers killing each other. And so God had a plan to reduce the evil on the planet. It didn't obviously remove all of it. So he said, you were to bring into the ark two of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. And I would like to think that in the original creation, that a male and a female together, which was part of the plan for humans, was also a part of the plan for animals. It's what I would like to believe. So I'm going to go through and give you some examples of bad bird families, and then I'll follow with some examples of good bird families that we could learn some lessons from. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. I don't know if there's anything worse that can happen to a young child than to be abandoned by your parents. Fortunately, here in human societies, when that happens, they're adopted. Somebody usually adopts them. They may wind up in an orphanage, though, for a long period of time. So the brown-headed cowbird is one of these birds. That's the male there. He's kind of a handsome guy, and there's the female. And these are both bad parents. So the males, they're basically courting. They find a female. They mate with her, and she's kind of lazy, doesn't really want to deal with the offspring. He could care less. He just wants to find other females. And so she looks around for the nest of another species and dumps her egg in that nest, or multiple eggs in the nest. And so they usually pick on a smaller species, and their chicks grow more rapidly than the host species chicks do. And there's something about birds where they tend to prefer to provide food for the one that has the biggest mouth and squawks the loudest, which happens to be the cowbird chick. So here's a proud mother feeding her son, but she doesn't realize it's somebody else's child, and her poor little chick's there begging, and she prefers feeding the one that's biggest. And look at him. So that mother there must be so proud of her big chick. No idea. It's amazing how this happens. So this is a classic example of a bad bird family. Don't imitate them. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So I think all of us appreciate having a good father. It's very possible some of us had fathers who basically abandoned us and did not treat us well. So the sage grouse is an example of a bird that has deadbeat dads. So these birds have, the males are kind of bizarre, and the female's more drab in her plumage, so she could hide in the vegetation more easily. She's less likely to get eaten by a predator. But the males, when it's time for them to breed in the spring, they gather together in a little group and they start displaying to the females. And when they display, they have these big air sacs and they go, and they do that in front of the females. They're trying to impress the females. So the females, they walk around and they're trying to decide, this guy, that guy, which of these guys is the hottest that I'm going to, mate with. And so usually it's like one or two birds that get most of the matings, and most of the others are losers. So you get a few winners, and when they finish mating, the guys wander off. They could care less what happens to their kids. But the females are good parents. They stick around, they lay the eggs and incubate them and raise a chick all by themselves because the dads are deadbeat dads. Better to live in a desert than with a quarrelsome and nagging wife. So there are examples in nature of malevolent moms, unfortunately. So this is a wattled jacana, a bird that lives throughout South America. They live in wetlands. And jacanas are rather interesting birds. They're a little different than most birds, but there are other birds that have a similar mating system. And what happens basically is you have one female that has multiple males, mates with multiple males. May seem hard to believe, doesn't it? And so once she mates with the male, she lays her eggs and in a nest, and then she leaves. So the male winds up incubating the eggs while she goes off looking for another male. And if she sees another male that's sitting on another female's eggs, she may chase that male from the nest, peck on those eggs and destroy them, and then mate with that male and lay her own eggs in the nest. Well, at least the dads are good dads, but terrible moms. Okay, so hopefully none of us grew up in a family like that, and hopefully none of us know people like that, but there are human families in which we have malevolent moms or deadbeat dads that don't take care of the offspring. Okay, so yeah, there's the dad. At least, we have a good dad there with his chick. Discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death. So discipline is important. This is a bird that lives in the Galapagos Islands, islands off the coast of Mexico. And just in the last few years, it started nesting in Southern California. They're expanding their range northward. Beautiful bird with blue feet. I've been to the Galapagos Islands. Actually, that's my photo. When you walk on the trail, these birds, they put their legs up in the air like that. And they lift up their wings and they go, shh, 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 shh. Really cool little birds. Well, actually, they're not that little. So they nest on the ground. And they're not the most hygienic birds. When they got to go, they just stand up and it goes. And they don't always go in the same direction. So, they go in random directions each time they got to poop, and they form a ring. We call that the guano ring. So they lay a couple of eggs in the nest. And both parents are actually pretty good parents in taking care of the eggs. They take turns incubating the eggs. And but they don't lay the eggs. The female does not lay the eggs in the same day. She'll lay an egg, and then a day or two later lay another egg, and sometimes they'll lay a third egg. And so what that means is that one egg hatches before the other. So the other second chick hatches a few days later, and so he's smaller than the oldest chick. Which, happens in human societies. We have older brother siblings and younger siblings. And so, unfortunately, if there's not enough food to feed these two, I better talk about this. If there's not enough food to feed both chicks, the older chick gets hungry and he gets aggressive and he starts to pick at that younger chick. And he starts beating them up and he chases them out of the ring. And the parents just idly watch this happening. They don't discipline their kids. And what eventually happens is the youngest chick is outside of the ring, and these guys nest in colonies. There's a bunch of them that are nesting in the same area. And so the parents will only take care of the chick that is inside the guano ring. And if the younger sibling is outside of the guano ring, it's abandoned. If it's lucky, it may get adopted by another one if it wanders into somebody else's guano ring. I actually saw this happen once. I was on a field trip at Loma Linda University in the Galapagos Islands way back decades ago. And we watched this happen several times. The chick was chased out of the ring. He came back in, and then he was chased out. It was a hot day. Poor little chick was tired, and we had to go. So we don't know what happened, but the chick probably died. Seems very cruel. But what it means is that instead of both chicks dying from starvation, one of them should have, hopefully will have enough food to survive. It's kind of a harsh way of nature ensuring that at least somebody survives. Okay? So not the best bird family. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. So we all know that building a house on the beach is not the best place to build a house. Well, there are some birds. These are western and Clark's grebes, and I studied these guys on Clear Lake for 10 summers. I did research. I had funding for it. I had lots of students working with me. Very good project. See, they're kind of like Jesus, running across the water. That's part of their courtship displays. That's probably a male and a female and two males, I believe, and I don't know which one the female was most impressed by, but they have very elaborate courtship displays. They're fun to watch. They nest in large colonies. They build these floating nests on water. Is that a good place to build a home? And because it's on water, it actually disintegrates fairly fast. So every day they got to keep adding material to that nest. And eventually they get a big colony like this and of birds. And so there he is on the nest. And the parents, both the mom and the dad, they actually take good, they build the nest, they work together, they take turns incubating the eggs. But this is a colony of about 400 nests, and I came by 4 days later, and almost all of them were blown by strong winds towards shore. And I had one colony that had about 1,000 nests that were all blown to shore by the wind. They didn't build very good homes, did they? I mean, that's their lifestyle, but, it'd be nicer if they could build something a little bit more solid than a floating nest. They also are prolific in laying eggs, and they go around, they dump their eggs in other nests, just like the cowbirds do. The 4 eggs are old eggs, and they're stained by the vegetation, and the 4 bluish eggs, the whiter eggs, those are new eggs that somebody dumped in the nest. I've seen as many as 31 eggs in a nest. There's 30 in that nest, and a couple days later I returned and there were 31. They just go around dumping eggs here and there. Kind of bizarre behavior. But they're actually, once they've been sitting on those eggs for about they sit on the eggs for about 3.5 weeks or so before they hatch. But once they've been there a couple of weeks, they put a lot of time and energy on that nest, and they're very defensive. You get close to it, and they'll attack you. They got sharp beaks. I actually got a little bit of video of one underwater, and I was holding my camera underwater, and it swam away from the nest, and it came back, and it stabbed me in the finger. And I was bleeding. I mean, I thought infection, death. Luckily, I didn't get infected, but they're tough birds, which is good that they defend the nest from people like me. And here's some, unfortunately, don't have a good neighborhood watch program. So there's one grebe that's just idly sitting on its nest while the crows are attacking the eggs on another nest. And here's again, they're not defending. Now, I have seen that when a crow or a gull lands on its own nest, the birds will chase them away. I don't know if these are abandoned eggs or if the parents were just off somewhere. They obviously weren't taking good care of their eggs for that to happen. And when the chicks do hatch, they're very good parents. They ride on the back of the parents. The parents stick together, and they provide fish for the little chicks to eat, which is good. They're good at raising the chicks once they hatch. I've heard of people having as many as 5, but I think that's the most I've ever seen. Okay, so enough of the bad bird families. Let's talk about some good bird families that we could learn some from. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown. So you guys have all heard of emperor penguins. There's even a cute little movie about them maybe 10 years or so ago. So these guys mate for life. They stick together until one partner dies. And it's cold there on the ice, and so when they lay an egg, the egg is actually on top of the feet of the bird to keep it off of the ice. And they tend to live in these large colonies here. They're like a big city of penguins. And the problem is there's no food there. So to find food, one of the birds has to go wandering off, and they're often like 20, 30, 40 miles from the edge of the ice. And the reason why is because as the warm weather advances, the edge of the ice pack is breaking and advancing toward these birds. And so they gotta they have to reproduce a long ways from that edge. So here's a couple of birds with that egg, and they just have one egg, and so they faithfully take care of that egg no matter what the weather is. They huddle together to try to stay warm. So here are the parents. They actually take turns walking back and forth along the ice pack to get to the ocean where they can go out there and find fish. And they just can't party and hang out with their friends and flirt with each other and that sort of thing. They got to be serious. They got to be focused on finding food for their offspring. And there are dangerous things out there, this is a leopard seal. I had to remember the name, and that can eat them. So they got to be very focused on getting the food and providing for their spouse back in the colony and the chicks, so the chicks can grow up and live a happy life together. Big families there. Looks like they're all in school there learning. So I think that's the kind of family God wants us to have. The wicked die and disappear, but the family of the godly stands firm. This is an oriental pied hornbill. I actually took that photo. That one's from Thailand. Hornbills are interesting birds. They nest inside of cavities. So what happens is the female goes inside the cavity, and she sits there and lays her eggs, and then they kind of close up that cavity with mud so that only her bill can stick out. So the male doesn't want to just abandon her. He has to go out and find food for her. So he goes flying out looking for food, and again, he can't party and hang out with the other guys and, drink alcohol, drink beer or whatever, and flirt with the ladies. He's got to be serious about this. He's got to go out and find food. He has to work hard to provide for his wife and the chicks that are going to hatch inside the nest. And so he eventually gets tired doing this. As the chicks get bigger and bigger, he's got to find more and more food. So eventually he tears down that wall so the female can come out, and then the two of them take turns flying back and forth to find food and bring it back to their nest so they could feed those nestlings as they grow up in a very safe, sheltered home. Okay? That's difficult for predators like snakes or an eagle or something to get into. Okay? So I think this is a good example for us of birds that the parents are responsible. They work hard to take care of the young, and they provide a good, solid home for the young to grow up inside of. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So this is an acorn woodpecker. This is a bird that lives near here. You may have seen it before. They look kind of like clowns, but they take life very seriously. And so they drill a hole. They have a cavity there, and they'll sleep in those at nighttime where it's safe, and they lay their eggs inside of those, and it's a good, safe place for them. And they also go out and they pick up acorns here and there, and they drill a hole in a tree. You may have seen this before. You could find telephone poles and tree trunks, and I've even seen them in a vehicle and in holes in rocks. And I've seen them in the back of a vehicle. I should have put the photo in here. So these are my photos here. So they're basically storing up food for the long winter months. And for their families, too, their future families, kind of like saving money for the kids to go to college and for retirement. And so the kids grow up inside of these cavities, and they're fed by the parents. And that may be, yeah. So when those kids grow up, they leave the cavity, but they don't just go wandering off looking for a mate for the next breeding season. They actually stick around for a few years and help mom and dad feed the younger brothers and sisters. Very good families. Now, they're not perfect families. There are some things that go on that we don't want to emulate, but a very good example of birds that live in good, solid homes. They take good care, both the mom and dad take good care of the offspring, and the offspring work together to take care of each other. We call that cooperative breeding. That's what scientists call it. There are a number of species of birds that do this. It's not very widespread, but in most birds, the young, when they leave home, they find a new territory somewhere else and have their own families. But yeah, the older siblings taking care of the younger siblings. And so they live a happy family life. So human families, this happens to be me and my wife, who's from Paraguay, and our son, who just got married. We've been together 36 years, and we're happy about that. Everything's worked well. It doesn't work well with everybody, though. So Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. It was not a part of God's plan. And it's very difficult for children. I imagine some of you grew up in a broken up family. Some of you had your families broken up after you began your own family. And it's tough on those kids. I lived in a very good family as we were growing up, but when I got into high school, I realized things were not going well. And then when I was in college, my parents split. And I'll tell you right now, it's the worst thing. Actually, it's now the third worst thing that happened to me. I'd say the worst things happened to me were when my father died and when my mother died, and that's all going to happen sooner or later. But yeah, it affected me. It probably didn't affect me as much had it happened when I was much younger, so I'm grateful I had a very good family growing up. But God wants us to have good families, and Satan does not. He wants to do everything he can to break them apart. So what are the lessons that we can learn from bird families? First of all, choose wisely who you marry. Don't marry a person that's going to just abandon the kids and dump, the eggs in somebody else's nest. Be faithful to your spouse. Stick around home. Help that spouse with the home and raising the kids. Build a solid and safe home, not one on the sand, not one floating out there in the water, but one that is sheltered from predators and from storms. A place where the kids can grow up safely and not be afraid every night that somebody may break in or whatever. Be content with what God has given you. This gets us into a lot of trouble when we want what somebody else has. The grass is always green on the other side. So God gives you a spouse. That spouse is not going to be perfect. You're stuck with that person, but make the best of it. Just stick with that person as long as you can, unless that person leaves you, I suppose. I mean, things happen. Be responsible. Work hard. Get an education. Get a good job. Provide for your family. Don't just go out in the evenings to the bar and, party with your friends or whatever. So God wants us to be hardworking, serious people. I'm very impressed with students that are, studying hard, trying to get a good education. The two students in that video, they're both studying in medical school at Loma Linda. I'm proud of them. Cooperate with all family members, your younger brothers, your younger siblings, older siblings, your parents, whoever. Work together, for the family. Help each other out. And discipline your children. When they do something wrong, don't let them just get away with it. Don't encourage it, Teach them that that's not right. That's not the way they should do things, and they need to, we all make mistakes, but the important thing is that we learn from our mistakes and become better human beings as a consequence. Obey and respect your parents. Hey, I have a kid. I only have one. But I still remember at like 1 o'clock in the morning, he was wide awake, eyes open. And my wife needed to sleep. And so I was up with him until like 4 o'clock in the morning. It happened a few times, like 3 hours. I'm just, in the chair with him in my arms and looking at him, wondering what kind of kid this is going to grow up to be. And then you got to change the diapers and I never realized what my parents had done for me. I'm too, those things happened when I was too young to realize my parents spent hours and hours and hours taking care of me. I deserved to treat them, the way they treated me. So, and then there are 3 commandments that God gave us that refer to families. First of all, honor thy father and mother. Respect our parents. Maybe our parents don't always treat us well. Maybe we have some issues with them. Maybe we weren't raised as well as we should, but hey, they're our parents, and that makes them special, okay? And so we need to honor them one way or another. Secondly, thou shalt not covet. This gets us into all kinds of trouble. Be happy with what we have. Don't wish you had somebody else instead of what God gave you. And And finally, thou shalt not commit adultery, which also gets us. I can't think of any sin that probably causes more pain and suffering for families than adultery. It's a leading cause of families breaking up and children not growing up with their mom and dad together. So I think these are all things that we could learn from the birds and from the Bible. Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commands always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. Thank you.